Hello, welcome to VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Each week we bring you the latest news, interviews and discussions on issues of importance and interest to the local government sector in Victoria. Joining me today, Mornington Peninsula Shire Mayor, Councillor Anthony Marsh is here to catch up on recent challenging issues for his council, including responding to the Macrae landslip last month and his council's sector-leading push towards open councillor briefings. I'll also catch up with Councillor Ronda Garad from Greater Dandenong Council on why she feels so strongly about open councillor briefings. She's leading a push for the introduction of a change at her council. But first, let's update you on some of this week's local government happenings with the VLGA Connect news. Dramatic scenes at the City of Casey this week during the council's first fully public council meeting since emerging from administration. More than 500 residents packed the council chambers, with tensions boiling over during discussions about private land use permits and vehicle storage regulations. Mayor Stephen Cooman was forced to adjourn the meeting after recent disruptions. Victoria Police were called to the meeting at around 6:15pm, eventually escorting councillors out of the chamber. Mayor Cooman later released a statement expressing disappointment that staff and councillors had been subjected to threatening behaviour. On Tuesday night, Whittlesea City Council unanimously passed a motion of no confidence in its Mayor Aidan McClendon after receiving a petition calling for his resignation from the office of Mayor. The councillors called on him to resign the office and said it would send its resolution and the petition to the Minister for Local Government for information. More discussion on both the Casey and Whittlesea issues coming up when I'm joined by Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers shortly here on VLGA Connect. Brimbank City Council has launched a Rail Before Runway campaign, advocating for the completion of Melbourne Airport Rail before the construction of a third runway at Melbourne Airport. It comes as Melbourne Airport's third runway is set for completion in 2031, with passenger numbers projected to reach 83 million by 2046. The movement is gaining significant public support, with 72% of surveyed Melburnians backing the prioritisation of Airport Rail Link and improved bus services over other projects. East Gippsland Shire Council is the latest to voice opposition to a new state government emergency services levy that will significantly increase costs for property owners from July. The council says primary producers are facing a hefty increase in the variable rate component, and Mayor John White is calling for the levy to be scrapped or at least administered by the state. The calls follow similar pleas from Mansfield Shire Council and Mount Alexander Shire Council in recent weeks. A Victorian parliamentary inquiry is underway to examine and follow up on Victorian Auditor-General reports regarding fraud and corruption in local government. The inquiry will review findings from 2 fraud-related reports and assess what has been done since their release. The Public Accounts and Estimates Committee is conducting the inquiry and must report its findings by November 20. Written submissions are due by the 7th of March and a public hearing is set for the 31st of March. Around 500,000 Victorian residents who missed voting in October's local council elections will soon be receiving notices in their mailboxes. Electoral Commissioner Sven Blumel said the notices are not fines, but rather an opportunity for residents to explain their absence from the polls. You'll have 28 days to respond in writing if you receive a notice. Those who fail to do so face a $99 penalty. And in appointment news this week at Bayside City Council, Matthew Cripps has been appointed as acting CEO, set to take the helm from March 28. He currently serves as Director of City Planning and Amenity and will step into the role as CEO Mick Cummins steps down. That's your VLGA Connect news for this week. Now let's dig a little deeper into 2 of those issues I reported on affecting the 2 councils that have recently come out of a period of administration. Casey, where this week's council meeting was adjourned due to continued disruption and threatening behaviour, and Whittlesea, where the council has called on its mayor to step down, passing a vote of no confidence. Tony, welcome back. Good to see you.
Great to see you too, Chris.
Big stories to talk about this week. We wanted to get your take on the 2 councils that coincidentally have come out of administration at last October's election and are making headlines for differing reasons. Let's start with the City of Casey, which had a council meeting this week that was adjourned after repeated disruptions, threatening behaviour. The police were called and it's made major news around the state.
It has, Chris, not unlike, I guess, some of the meetings we had last term that had to be aborted because of raucous public galleries. But interestingly, this one was the first meeting that Casey Council had outside business hours,
Mm.
really to facilitate public involvement and public coming along, and that was highly successful. I think there was over 500 people in the gallery that attended. I think there was 63 registered questions asked in the question time, which
Yeah.
took place at the start of the meeting. But yeah, right from the very start, there was a loud element, interjecting element in the gallery, right from the acknowledgement of country that the Mayor Stefan Kuman did, and that continued throughout. And ultimately, after almost 2 hours, with an attempted an adjournment to try and sort of bring the gallery to order, a decision was made to adjourn the meeting to a later date, and many of the items on the agenda couldn't be dealt with as a result.
Tony, I haven't been in too many council chambers that have got room for 500 people. It must be a large meeting space.
Yeah, Narry Warren, it was held in.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it'd be very much standing room only. I've
Mm.
seen images and obviously watched snippets on the feed, on the recording, and there were lots of people standing up in the gallery. And yeah, many people interjecting. Seems to have been two key issues that brought people to the meeting and sort of caused the angst, neither of which were on the agenda of the
Yeah, I
meeting
wondered
per
about that,
se.
but they've been in the media, haven't they? The likes of A Current Affair and what have you have talked about
Mm.
these stories of permit issues and vehicles on private property. I think there was an example where some were actually removed, correct?
That's correct. So one of the elements that brought people to the meeting and caused them to be uh, interjecting and angry at council was the community local law, which was actually introduced on the 1st of July 2024, when there were, of course, administrators at Casey. Not unlike community local laws across Victoria, there's an element in there of seeking to have provisions to prevent people leaving their private properties in a state that is causes loss of amenity for the neighbourhood. We have people hoarding. We know this is an issue that occurs. So, for instance, the community local law has provisions that require people to obtain a permit if they want to store a shipping container on private property. That seems reasonable. You mentioned motor vehicles, Chris. There's a
Mm.
provision that if a landholder is storing more than two unregistered motor vehicles on their residential property or their private land, then they need to obtain a permit for the vehicles more than two that are being stored there and are unregistered. That I can imagine how some people who collect vehicles, do them up, might be concerned, but we're not talking about, Tony's 1970s Ford Fairlane that he drives on a weekend. That would be a registered vehicle. We're not talking about mum's car, dad's car, and the adult children's cars. These are unregistered vehicles, and it's designed, I guess, to avoid this proliferation of vehicles on site. There are also some provisions around recreational vehicles, things like motorbikes, motor scooters, RVs, peewee bikes, etc. A
Mm.
requirement for a permit to ride those on one's private residence. Now, I think these are reasonable provisions. I'm not saying that they could not be improved. It occurs to me that if you had a very large shed, for example, and you stored the unregistered vehicles in the shed and they weren't visible from,
Yeah.
the public realm or, private property adjacent, well, isn't it reasonable you can store them in a shed? If you had maybe a large property of a couple of hectares in a residential area, maybe you oughtn't need a permit to ride your mini bike
Yeah.
on your large property. But these are tweaks, and I would think that it's very reasonable to have a community law like this. Chris,
And you say they're reasonable, but they're also not unusual, are they?
no,
Wouldn't most councils have these types of provisions in their community local law?
precisely. Most councils would, for that very reason I outlined earlier, that this is, we're trying to protect the amenity of a neighbourhood,
Mm.
the area. We're trying to also avoid things like, you know, commercial operations, say a panel beating shop or a mechanics workshop occurring in a residential area without a planning permit. What was interesting for me, Chris, was I went through the Casey Council minutes for the last 18 months or so, and there was a community consultation process undertaken by the prior council with administrators in 2023 in relation to the community local law that had these provisions in it. And Chris, want to guess how many public submissions were received?
I'd say zero or one.
You're right,
Yeah,
zero.
yeah.
There were
Mm.
zero public
It's
submissions
usually
received.
the
Now,
case. Yeah.
that's not, I'm not saying that the public oughtn't be able to have a say now, but clearly, you know, this wasn't picked up generally
Mm.
as a concern by the public in when it went through that consultation process in 2023, or indeed seems when the law was introduced in July 24. And I have some sympathy for the cohort of councillors who you know, copped this angst and abuse on Tuesday night. They certainly weren't there and involved in the decision to introduce a local law. We may well see that there might be some tweaks and improvements to it as a result of this concern, but it's disappointing when you have, you know, mobs of people coming along um, and you know, they say they want their questions answered, but I suspect, Chris, that they don't really want to enter into a, you know, a discourse or a reasonable conversation at the time. They just want to express their anger. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone in the room was came with that approach, but clearly some did. There was another key issue, though, Chris. We shouldn't forget that and another issue that drove a lot of the people to come into that council meeting on Tuesday night was an ongoing issue that's been a big concern in the Hallam area, and that is the uh, proposed new waste transfer station to be located at the existing Hallam
Yes.
Road landfill. That is a $26 million proposal. This waste transfer station itself is to be located within 250 metres of some dwellings. So understandably, there would be some resident concern about the impact of that proposed waste transfer station on their amenity. But again, council, I think, are unfairly copying the brunt of resident concern. Council is not the applicant for
Yeah.
this development. Veolia, a very large international private waste company, is. Council isn't the responsible authority to issue the approval. That is the EPA, Environment Protection Authority in Victoria. And indeed, looking at the history, it seems that council's been a very strong advocate for the EPA to listen to resident concerns here, to have an extension of the community consultation period, and to the state government, indeed, you know, expressing concerns about what impact this facility might have on
Mm.
neighbours in the area. So again, I feel sorry for these particular councillors who cop the brunt of abuse for something that is long-standing and ultimately isn't a decision that council have made. In fact, they
Yeah.
are advocating for residents.
A rocky start indeed for the new council there. Now, as of recording, I don't believe the adjourned meeting has been set for a new date. We'll keep an eye on that. It is just such a shame. People, they may have very valid points, but you don't get them across by being threatening and disruptive, as some people, as you say, appear to have done on this occasion. Let's just quickly touch on the other out of administration council issue this week, Tony, in the time we have left. That's over at the City of Whittlesea, where the Mayor, Aidan McClendon, ran for the Werribee state by-election recently. That decision has got him in trouble with his fellow councillors, who've this week passed a motion of no confidence, called on him to step aside. They say they'll send that and a petition that they've received to the Minister for Local Government. I detected, and I did watch this back, a bit of confusion amongst the councillors even about what sort of power they had here to deal with this issue, Tony.
And I can understand that. And in fact, whilst the mayor is, of course, elected for a term, either 1 year or 2 years, by his or her councillor colleagues, once that election has taken place, in my view, unless there's some disqualifying matter that arises, like, the mayor's having a job that disqualifies, or becoming a bankrupt, etc., then there is no ability for the councillors, by way of a notice of motion or a notice of no confidence in this case, to require or enforce the mayor to cease to hold that position. It's a matter now for the Mayor, Aidan McClendon, as to whether he chooses to step down. He's in a difficult position, I think. Does he continue to attempt to perform his mayoral role, which he legally can do, but when he doesn't appear to have the support and confidence of all his council colleagues, and presumably that will impact upon his ability to chair meetings and successfully sort of
so
deal with
to be clear,
colleagues.
he could step down if he wanted.
Could, if he chose to.
He's not done so at this point in time. But there's also other processes at play here, aren't there?
Well, that's right. That's right. So about only, I think, 2 weeks prior to this notice of no confidence, another resolution was passed unanimously by the other 10 councillors at Whittlesea, which was to refer the mayor to an internal arbitration process for alleged breaches of the Model Councillor Code of Conduct connected with his media and social media statements during that by-election campaign in Werribee that you mentioned. So, to my mind at least, I think that particular, the outcome of that forthcoming arbiter hearing is critical. That will determine whether the mayor has breached the Model Code of Conduct in his commentary. And indeed, under the new provisions that apply this term, the arbiter has available to them a stronger range of sanctions, including the ability to require someone to cease to hold the position of mayor for a period of time. That's one of their discretionary sanctions available to the arbiter. So I think it might be to my mind, it's perhaps a bit premature to decide, are there grounds for us to say that the mayor has breached the Model Code of Conduct when there's that process before us, and presumably will play out over the next couple of months.
Regardless, a couple of months into the term, it's not a great start, is it, for Whittlesea Council?
No, it's not. And this is a council that has, in the past had a history of strong political divisions. Now, it just doesn't necessarily reflect that, in that, it's not two camps that have been the case previously at Whittlesea. It seems it's the mayor versus the rest of the councillors. Look, I'm really interested in the outcome of the arbiter hearing. My view is some of the commentary I've seen across the sector refers to the fact that, comments by the mayor during the by-election campaign offended certain people in the community.
Right.
And whilst I appreciate that line of thought, I don't think that that is the right line of thought to take in terms of, has the mayor breached the code of conduct? My view is that the question is, were the mayor's comments made in a respectful way, in a courteous way? Did he make it clear that they were made, they were personal comments? They weren't comments made on behalf of the council, didn't reflect the council's position. And provided he did that, I think it's reasonable for he, or indeed any councillor or particular candidate for election, to be able to comment on whether they think Australia Day should be celebrated on the 26th or not. Those are the sort of issues I believe that he was like articulating in his campaign. And to me, it's not so much whether he offended anyone or any group, but did he express those views in a way that breached the code of conduct. And I don't think we're a country that would say, we have these democratic values that would say you can't ever make a statement that says, I disagree with that position, that in fact the previous administrators would have had some say in, and you're not allowed to express a view simply because it might offend someone in the community. I think if you express the view in a courteous, respectful way, and you make it clear that's your own personal opinion, then you ought to be able to do that. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily the right outcome here in this case. I think those sorts of arguments ought to be tested through the arbitration process.
All right, we'll wait and see how that one plays out. I noticed there was one lone dissenting voice in the gallery at that meeting. Nothing on the scale of what happened at Casey, but that person was asked to leave and did leave as well on Tuesday night. Tony, always great to get your view on these issues. Thanks for popping in, and thanks to the team at Hunt and Hunt Lawyers for the ongoing support of VLGA Connect.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
That's Tony Raunic here with us on this week's edition. Up next, a couple of interviews I recorded earlier in the week. You'll notice my shirt changes. I've given up trying to manage the wardrobe through this new format. Anthony Marsh and Ronda Garad join me shortly here on VLGA Connect. Last week on the program, we spoke to a former council CEO in Mark Dupay about the open briefing movement being led by Mornington Peninsula Shire. This week, I want to get the councillor perspective, and we'll have a couple of speakers on this issue, but a very busy man joining us today, and I do appreciate your time. Anthony Marsh, Mayor of Mornington Peninsula, welcome to the program.
G'day, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Before we get to open briefing, can we deal with the other big issue that's been occupying, I expect, a lot of your time lately, and that's the Macrae landslide and a bit of back and forth in the press with the state government. Just how are things sitting at the moment between you and the state?
I don't think much has changed. So as I think you reported recently, we wrote to the state government on the 21st of January asking for urgent support, either financial, technical, or both. And obviously, the landslide is an event that's in our backyard, but it's way beyond the capability of council in many different facets. Sadly, they came out, without responding to that letter, came out obviously in a very public way and called for a board of inquiry looking backwards. I guess you'd call it an autopsy. And the issue I have is we're mid-surgery. We're still trying to fix the issue, and they're looking at, looking back and doing this big board of inquiry with an autopsy. The problem is it's now, I think we're 28, 29 days since I wrote that letter. I've heard nothing. So they came out and did the very public, finger pointing activity in front of the cameras. But other than that, we've heard absolutely nothing from the state, which is, I think it's quite disgraceful, to be honest. We're in a place where we've got 19 homes, people displaced from their homes across 19 homes. But the good news is we last Friday managed to lift the building orders on 8 of those. So 8 families were able to either get access or move back into the home. So that's a positive, but sadly the state's still missing in action. And that announcement was dampened by news of burglaries as well. And I do notice some comments you made about a lack of police surveillance at the time. Again, people blaming the council for that? That's right. And, I get it, right? People don't really care whether it's council, state or federal. They just want the problem solved. So there was a number of burglaries over the past week. Most of those, I believe, were Friday morning around 3 a.m. So council stepped in when the police withdrew some of their resources. And, this is no criticism of the police. I'll just say that. They're obviously resource in whatever way they are. It's basically they withdrew some surveillance equipment, and the patrols are probably not as high as we would like them to be. So we backfilled that with private security. But, anyone would know ratepayers shouldn't be funding private security in lieu of policing, right? That's clearly not the responsibility or the role of council. And sadly, even though we had 2 24-hour patrols, people still able to access homes, ransacked, broke windows, stole some items. So incredibly disappointing. So we've put, again, a bit more pressure on the state saying, we're not Victoria Police. We can't possibly be expected to do this. And even if we get private security, it's obviously no replacement. Even as a deterrent, it doesn't have the same sort of impact of a police car doing the rounds or police walking on the street. So luckily, yesterday being Monday, the police installed a new CCTV surveillance sort of trailer out the front of the unit block that was the main target. And that's great. So, if nothing else, the advocacy seemed to put a bit of pressure on, and, that was incredibly welcomed by the residents in the area.
That's something, I guess. As you say, we're recording this earlier in the week. This will go out late Friday on the weekend. Using a crystal ball, where do you expect things to be sitting by the end of the week with regard to those other homes?
Yeah, so I think the security situation will hopefully calm down. I think we've got 5 roaming patrols now, more cameras set up, obviously a bit more police resources. So hopefully that is not an ongoing problem, but we'll wait and see, I suppose. But in terms of getting the others back into their homes, hopefully by the time this goes live, we've had a few more, at least get temporary access to check valuables, empty the fridge, that type of thing. In terms of long-term permanent return for those residents, it's a watch and wait. We've obviously got to make sure that the safety is there. It's our paramount concern is human safety and life. So, we're not going to let people get back in unless the engineers and the building surveyors are absolutely certain that it's safe to do so.
Yeah. All right. All power to you there. Let's talk about the open briefing issue. Are you surprised by how people are looking to you as the sector leader in Victoria on this issue? It's really one of the hot topics around councils at the moment.
Yeah, I think we knew going into it was probably going to be a hot topic. And it's always a risk, I think, being a trailblazer in local government, I think that can mean one of 2 things. One is you're actually pushing the boundaries in a really good way. Or the other one is, maybe you haven't thought about why people haven't done it yet enough. And maybe that's not such a good thing. So I'm not surprised. And obviously it's an ongoing matter that we're still under consideration with our council.
So you've got a protocol out at the moment for consultation. How does it sit with where you thought this issue might go when you as a council voted to take it down this path last year?
So obviously I'll speak on behalf of myself. I won't speak on behalf of council because we're not there yet. But I think, to be honest, if you're going to go down this path, I think the protocol is not too bad. It's definitely trying to make sure that we don't get all those unintended consequences by separating briefings and workshops, and they're defined quite well because at the moment, most councils probably don't have a good definition of what is a briefing versus the other working sort of stuff that you do. So, it's probably not perfect, but it's not a bad crack at it. And when I debated this, there's 4 decisions that led us to today, right? We've already had 4 decisions over the past 12 months that led us to this draft being put out for consultation. And my original criticism of briefings, and this is off the back of the Sandon recommendation, I think it's 22 as well, that talks about, you shouldn't be making or workshopping ideas in a briefing. Briefings are there to basically present a proposed report that will eventually, hopefully not too far in the future, get tabled at a council meeting. And it gives councillors an opportunity to ask questions. But it shouldn't change during that process. And my criticism quite publicly in the past has been something gets tabled at a briefing, there's a bunch of chatter that goes on, supposedly no decisions, but then the report's changed between the briefing and the council meeting. And my criticism was always, where's the traceability of that? Because I went to the briefing thinking, I'm happy with this, therefore I don't need to comment. And then boom, it comes to a council meeting with a different proposal. And that's where I had a huge issue. So my advocacy was always, the way to address that would be to have maybe some public documentation shown as to, this is what was tabled at the meeting in terms of like a pack or something. And then here's a summary of the conversations and some takeaways. And that's it. I was happy with that. The problem is that didn't come. And I think what we've got now is we've gone maybe possibly too far the other way to try to compensate for that. And I think the problem is if the system was working as it's intended, we probably wouldn't need to do this sort of stuff. I think that's the comment I would make.
So Mark Dupay on our program last week used the word bifurcation in terms of separating out the briefing process from the workshopping of ideas process. Are you comfortable with the way those issues are teased out?
I think, I was trying to work out what was the intent of the update to the Code of Conduct, because if you look at the Act, the only real change that happened before, we made this decision last year, we had the new Local Government Act changes come through, which had a model Code of Conduct. And the one thing that has changed, I think it's section 4, integrity. There's this third dot point that talks about council information should not be released to the public unless it's in the public interest. And I was really trying to understand, like, what are they getting at there? Because if you look at I think it's the explanatory statement of the actual act change or even the regulation itself, it doesn't really define what that means or where it came from. I even looked at the readings in Parliament. There's no conversation around why this little dot point was added to the Model Code of Conduct. And that makes sense because it's a prescribed thing that came out of the regulations. But there is a takeaway there's a guidance document about the Model Code of Conduct. It's a 40-odd page thing, and it does talk about things that are preliminary or, working drafts, that type of thing. So I think there is some clarity on what is and what isn't kind of sensitive internal documentation. And I think that's quite clear. The problem is it's a guidance document. It's not actually prescribed. So it's a bit tricky on whether you take that as, legal. But I think I agree. If it's something that's, and I think if you take a pretty non-political look at it, workshopping, preliminary drafts type stuff is pretty clear. It's obvious. Whereas things that come to a briefing are basically, they're at the final stages. The councillors have finalised a report and they're basically looking for final feedback or, Q&A so councillors can get informed before a council meeting. So I think the line is pretty obvious to me. But, some people in a political sense might argue, oh, no, this isn't a workshop, it's a briefing so that they can get up on their box and talk about it in a public way.
As I said, a lot of talk about this in the sector. How much talk about it is there in your community?
Not a lot. I mean, I'm curious to see how many people have responded to the consultation. It's still open, so time will tell. But often you find that, we often talk about trying to increase transparency and we've got to be more open to our community. And they're all great intentions. But when you actually put this stuff out for feedback, you get, 6 people comment and it's the same 6 people. So I think by and large, people want us to get elected and do the job well and give them good outcomes. They probably don't need to see the inner workings of every conversation we have. So I think people will see. I could be proven wrong when we get the consultation back, but I think generally people probably aren't that interested. But, it's when it's an issue that hits them in their lives or their homes or the community group, that's when they come out. And, the obvious example for Mornington Peninsula, and dare I say it, Harry Potter, a couple of those big ticket items where people get really interested. But, a briefing being published probably wouldn't have changed that because it was confidential and wrapped up in all sort of commercial and confidence anyway. So I think, to Mark's point, a lot of the stuff that is not sensitive, not commercial, it's sort of in the final stages, whether it adds value having that published or streamed or recorded, I'm not sold yet. But I think, if we can get those final stage reports that are briefed on streamed and if that improves transparency in some way, I'm all for it, but I'm just not sure it's going to meet the intent.
I think it was one of the greater Dandenong councillors in debate said that people don't really want to see how the sausage is made. They're more worried about what comes out at the other end, which I thought was an interesting way to put it. Just on the issue of transparency, can I ask you, without notice, you've recently cancelled your community panel, which was another sector-leading consultation mechanism. What do you say to those people who suggest that doing that on the one hand while you're trying to be more transparent in your decision-making process are counterintuitive?
Yeah, and I think this is a massive talking point. So we actually have, we've established a small single-purpose panel for our council plan. That's about 60-odd people, I think, going into that. The problem is when we had the citizens panel, it became the sort of default consultation. So you had the same, I think we started at 50 people. We got down to sort of 30 odd people show up. You had the same 30 people were getting to make all the decisions. And we often would resort to the panel rather than going out more broader. And the issue I had is, there'll be people that are impacted by those decisions. They might not want to join the panel and be on for 12 months, but they've lost that opportunity to engage. So the councillors that voted to remove that, their commentary was pretty clear. It was, we want broader access to the opportunity to consult or to engage in consultation, which I agree with entirely. The other one was the panel, unlike a lot of our other advisory groups and, engagement processes, it's paid. So you've got, we probably have hundreds of people that are sitting on various council committees across the whole Shire, whether it's Disability Advisory Committee or Coastal Advisory or, PACE, which is our Elders Committee. None of those are getting paid. They come out of the goodness of their heart because they're interested in that particular area. Whereas the panel was kind of pay for play almost, we reimburse them, it's not a huge amount of money, but there was a bit of discomfort with that. But I think broadly people wanted to say, well, we've got 170,000 odd people in the community. We can't just open it up to 33. And then there was the other issue, which got better over time, but we had the panel would consider an issue and it wasn't always clear how that came into the decision-making process as a councillor. So at the council, I would consider an item And sometimes you'd realise that the community, the citizens panel were talking about an issue that we'd voted on 2 months ago. So what's the point? There's no linkage to an actual decision in the chamber. So there was a whole bunch of concerns, but ultimately I think this is better for transparency and engagement, because now the idea is, and our transparency policy is pretty clear. Anything that is coming to the chamber in a policy sense should go out for consultation. And in lieu of a panel, that means open up to the whole peninsula.
Good to get that context. Some of that I don't think came out in the reporting about that decision. So
No,
thank
I
you
agree.
for explaining that. Thank you very much for coming on VLGA Connect. Great to catch up with you, and all the best with these other very challenging issues that you're dealing with during your mayoral term. You must
Thanks,
feel
Chris.
like you've walked under a ladder or crossed the path of a black cat or something.
Yeah, no, it's pretty intense. And I think, you know, that I do wonder whoever comes in after me is probably going to be like, what are you worried about? It's simple, but they didn't have to appoint an acting CEO. They didn't have to hire a CEO. They didn't have a federal election. They didn't have a landslide. They didn't have a council plan. So, you know, it's intense, but that's part of the job and I love it. So it's good.
Anything you can tell us about the process to appoint your new CEO? Where are you at?
Yeah, I'd say we're halfway. So it's on the back end now, and hopefully, the next month or so we'll be able to announce that. So looking forward to it.
Look forward to that announcement. Thank you, Anthony. Great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Chris.
That's Anthony Marsh, the Mayor of Mornington Peninsula Shire Council. We're going to stick with the open briefing issue for just a little bit longer, and I want to bring in the councillor from Greater Dandenong, who's leading the charge for briefing sessions to be streamed to the public online, more transparency, and I guess to use her words, dealing with the issue of trust, where people think decisions are being made behind closed doors. I don't want to sum it all up that simply, Ronda Garad, but thank you very much for coming on the program.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
So why have you taken the lead on this? You know, Mornington Peninsula, obviously some way down the path. Were you inspired by what they're doing?
I was certainly aware of it, but not so much. I had two really main reasons for wanting to open our briefing meetings. The first, of course, is around civic trust and engagement. We hear a lot from, residents that say, they're making decisions behind closed doors. They're doing things that are not great for the community, a whole lot of fear and suspicion, which we know is not true, but why would they know it's not true?
Yeah.
I have a lot of empathy with them when they say, you're actually making all the decisions before you come to a council meeting, and a council meeting is really just performative because all the decisions are being made. And I know that's not true, certainly for me, but I understand why they could have those thoughts. So my main reason was certainly that. And, there is a global movement towards more transparency in government. And I think that this is where we're headed, and I think we should take it full on. But actually, my second motivation was around, the role of a councillor and actually myself. There's a lot of benefits for councillors in this. And really, I want to talk hypothetically. I'm not talking specifically about my council, because I talk to a lot of councillors across a whole range of councils, and we all have this same issue. That the Act is very clear that briefing should be only about information gathering and time to ask questions. But, what actually happens is people get very comfortable over time. At best, there's complacency. And at worst, there's a more sinister, approach to things. But, whilst you may not actually explicitly make decisions, you can certainly influence. You can certainly allow more time to somebody that is putting a position that you might agree with. And I'm talking about being the chair. If you are not the chair and you are a councillor in a briefing meeting, you are powerless virtually to control what goes on there, even with your best attempts at trying to get the chair's attention. So you are exposed to what you might know is not ideal. You're very powerless to do something about it, and you're actually complicit. But Also concerningly, particularly this term, we have a lot of young new councillors. And my real concern is they're coming into a culture where this is normalised. And I think we can do better. And I know that, you know, when someone's watching you, you do better, you know.
So this issue of councillor behaviour at briefing sessions, I've heard this put, and I want to put it to you that, you know, in some councils, not all, some councillors routinely don't attend briefing sessions because, you know, when it comes down to the legislation, they don't have to. There's no decisions being made, or the behaviour, because it's behind closed doors, perhaps is less than optimal. Do you see that as a reason for lifting the shroud on how briefing sessions are conducted?
Absolutely. You know, I have the privilege of having worked in senior executive positions over my career, so I've been exposed to good governance. And the problem is a lot of councillors haven't. And so they're reliant on the culture they come into to understand what good governance is. And when it's less than ideal, you know, this gets perpetuated, this culture gets perpetuated. I think that when, you know, you have a risk of dominant personalities influencing others, you have a risk of, you know, those with a particular perspective being allowed more time, as I said. You have a perspective where you have voting blocks, and you often have voting blocks in councils. You will have a particular perspective exposed, which is not necessarily evidence-based. And I really want to emphasise we should be making evidence-based decisions and decisions in the best interest of our community. That is often that is not always done. So often you'll get, and I'm going to say, a perverse kind of way of decision making, which, you know, I'm not going to say is particularly, you know, engineered always, but it's often about lack of skill, lack of knowledge, or this complacency. You know, we spend a lot of time together, and it feels a bit like a family at times, a dysfunctional family often, but you get relaxed. Even the officers become relaxed. Also, my real concern is that I rarely hear the term community used, often by officers who are bureaucrats in nature and not, you know, we are the community representatives. But I often get concerned that when we're provided with options, they're often maybe the efficient option, maybe the most feasible, but we often don't hear what does that look like from a community perspective. And obviously that's our role. But I think if we opened up briefing meetings, officers just might blend that perspective in the options they give us.
So can I just test that? And that's not been my experience, I've got to say, with officers and recognising the community impacts of decisions that they're recommending. But you know, not every council's the same, obviously. What do you say to those people who suggest that opening up briefing sessions to public scrutiny, public observance, would mean that officers are less likely to give their frank and fearless advice, whether it's because, you know, they feel like they're being put on the spot and they're going to be somehow held accountable for that, or nervousness or lack of skill in speaking in what they perceive as a public forum?
Yep, and we're hearing a lot about the officers' discomfort and CEOs' discomfort. And I would just caveat to say, local, you know, government is about people, but let's just deal with that. So we have the provisions that we have in meetings, which under the Act, we can use confidentiality provisions. So anything that is particularly, you know, in that grey zone where it needs to be not perhaps in the public eye in the first instance, there is those provisions. So that deals with that, first of all. But I really want to kind of go into frank and fearless advice. Yeah. Why would the community not want to hear that? Why would there be reticence for officers not to bring that into the public realm? And we've got to remember, we're not in a not-for-profit corporation or a corporation. This is a public government space where we're making really, you know, really important decisions that affect communities' lives. The assumption that the community can't cope with frank and fearless decisions, I think, is quite insulting, I'm going to say,
Yeah.
as a resident, and we're all residents too. I want to hear the real story. You know, if there's a you know, if there's an issue, I want to know, what's the landscape there? Tell us what's really the context there. And I want you to be honest, and I want you to deal with evidence, and I want you to be very clear about what's at stake. So why is presenting frank and fearless advice something the community can't cope with?
So I might suggest, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, we have seemed to have moved into an environment where expressing ideas, bringing forward suggestions, often gets people attacked rather than it being about the contest of ideas. And we're seeing this as we head towards a federal election. There's already been some commentary about let's have a contest of ideas and not attack people for suggesting them. Could there be an element of that, do you think?
Look, you're in a political space, you're going to get attacked, Chris, and we're attacked all the time on Facebook. The important thing is to be able to defend your position. I made that call because why? And so it's not important that you're attacked. If we all stopped doing what we're doing because we're going to be attacked, walk away. Walk away, because why are you there? No one wants to be attacked.
But an officer can't just walk away. There's a power imbalance, is what people would suggest.
Okay, so, I think there's a real risk here that we are talking about a fear as opposed to capacity. If we provided officers with training around how you present these things in a way that is going to minimize their likelihood of being attacked, and it's often about the words you use and the way you frame something that can minimize that. So are we depriving the community of an opportunity to be exposed to government processes because of fear and lack of capacity? I think there's a real worry there. And I often hear language where I think if you'd frame that differently, there's a whole lot of less risk around that. And that's just lack of training.
Yeah, that's a skill issue.
Why are we not providing that kind of training?
A good question. Can I ask you perhaps one more, and that is the suggestion. I know you heard the discussion I had with Mark Dupay last week, which threw up a few issues about things that need to be fully considered, I guess, if you're going to go down this path. What about this idea that because some stuff has to be kept confidential for varying good reasons, that by the time you remove all of that, there's really nothing much of interest left for the community to, let's say, get their teeth into? How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Look, I think it's interesting. And personally, I think we often put confidentiality caveats over things for reasons that are not always justified. Certainly commercial in confidence contracts. Certainly, we understand there are certain things. I think this is used too much. As a community member, I want to be exposed to if the organisation is facing financial challenges. I want to know that. I don't think that should be a confidentiality, a blanket put over that. So I think we need to challenge what is asserted, and we can do it portions of a conversation can be exposed, and maybe certain portions not. But I think we really need to push back on this idea that everything has to be kept quiet. But I do want to just raise one other point, Chris, and that is the point that I haven't heard anybody talk about. We talk about people might be fearful of raising questions or saying things, but what if they're not saying anything? What if they're not asking any questions? And I've got to tell you, my experience is that's a greater danger. Or if they're not coming to briefing meetings. That is a greater danger to our community than what any kind of fear around, a slip of the tongue or something that might, expose them in some way. I think the community understand that councillors, we are community members that for a privileged period of time, go and make these decisions. A lot of councillors are not lawyers or whatever. So occasionally we may be loose in language. But I've got to tell you, my greatest fear is that questions are not asked, and that there is this, there may be apathy or complacency, and that actually is a bigger threat than than the other. So
Mm.
I've not heard that spoken about. And the community deserves to see who's not turning up, who's not asking questions, who's not being heard, actually, when you have dominant, personalities.
Yes.
I have real concerns about capacity. I'm not talking about my council only, but about the capacity of chairs to chair well and fairly. I'd like to see much more structure around allowing each councillor at a particular time and opportunity, because we just see the dominant personalities taking over.
Yeah.
I think that, councillors need more training in how to frame questions, how to, what's in the best interests, what questions should we always be asking. There's very little training on that. And I think that putting a camera in is going to lift the capability of all of us. And I think it's, on balance, a really good thing.
That's a very timely segue, because we're coming up to a discussion about the mandatory training and the new guidelines under the new Local Government Act. So thanks for opening the door there. Before I let you go, your council has called for a report on the costs and the resourcing implications of opening up briefing sessions. I did note it was a tied vote and the Mayor used a casting vote to allow this report to come forward. That must have been pleasing to see that go that way, ultimately.
It's pleasing that we got it through. And we'll see if it gets through once the report comes through. And I'm also very interested to see what's in that report, because actually it's just videoing a meeting. So I'll be interested to see what's kind of loaded into that report. But I think it's concerning that councillors chose not even to vote for a report investigating what's involved. And what is involved actually is the cost, but also, what are the governance processes that will have to be tweaked and so on. So not even enough curiosity or interest or, siding on the side of integrity and building, strong relationships with our community. Not even enough interest to vote for a report. So, you might say that's good. I think it's concerning, but that's my perspective. Obviously I'm very strongly committed to this. So we got it through and ultimately that's the main thing. But, I think we could do better.
All right, we'll look forward to see what comes next. And of course, Mornington Peninsula just a little way ahead with their protocol out for consultation at the moment. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll be talking about the issue of open briefings. You noted in your...
Can I just say, Chris, though, just that protocol, I am a bit concerned about the workshopping element of that. I'm a bit concerned that if we go that way, everything will become a workshop too. So I think we need to be very wary of how this is, of the implementation of this.
Yeah, we spoke to Anthony Marsh about that just a little earlier as well. You noted in your debate, which I thought was a good debate, by the way, that New South Wales looks like they're about to bring in, I know there's been quite a bit of pushback, but to bring in a requirement for briefing sessions to be open to the public. We're yet to see the detail of that. So it certainly does feel like this is something that's coming in some shape or form.
And I think it's a fantastic move, because that will build capacity across the whole sector. And I think that's, I'd love to see the Victorian government do the same.
All right, let's wait and see what happens next. I do appreciate your perspective on it. Thank you for coming on VLGA Connect.
Yeah, great pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's where we must leave this week's edition. We're holding over the discussion about the mandatory training requirements for councillors. You can expect that in next week's edition. We're also going to find out a bit more about the move at Mount Alexander Shire and Hepburn Shire to collaborate on providing building services. And who knows what else might happen between now and then. Rest assured, we'll be here to cover off on it on VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you again soon.